I have been writing this ledger for 3 months. I am not certain I will finish it. That is not the concern it might seem. I am old enough and thorough enough that the relevant portions are already set down in a form the Institute can use when the time comes. What remains is this section, the one I have written and discarded 11 times. Let me try once more. My name is Vesan Arik. For 29 years I served the Vethrani Fleet Analysis Corps as a border operations reviewer, the last 9 of them in the post-action division, where we were tasked with understanding, in formal and defensible language, why things had gone wrong. I retired 22 years ago. I have not spoken publicly about the HFY survey since my deposition before the Compact's closed review board in the year following. This ledger is not public. It will be filed with the Rathaki Institute upon my death, sealed for 30 years, and then either released or reclassified at the Institute's discretion. I am writing it because I am the last surviving member of the analytical team that approved the crossing, and because I believe the record as it stands is technically accurate and substantively wrong, and I cannot die having allowed that to stand uncorrected in a document with my name attached. Here is what the record says. The Vethrani HFY border survey ran for 11 months prior to the crossing. The survey instruments were calibrated to the highest standard available. The data they returned was reviewed by 7 analysts, myself included, and confirmed by 2 senior attesters before presentation to the Fleet Command. The data showed the following. No active defensive array within sensor range of the border. No patrol signature in the outer margin. No power generation consistent with active weapons platforms. No communications traffic of the kind associated with coordinated military response. No fleet massing on approach vectors. The data was accurate. Every instrument was functioning. Every reading was confirmed. I have reviewed the raw telemetry myself, 4 times in the years since. The instruments were not wrong. That is what I need you to understand. The instruments were not wrong. What the instruments measured was stillness. 23 years of survey records across 11 different monitoring bodies, going back further than our own fleet's engagement history, all showed the same thing. Human space was quiet. The border did not respond. The sector did not move. There were no transmissions outward, no patrol sweeps we could detect, no visible fortification of the line that separates their space from ours. We read it the way you read any data point that persists across decades of consistent measurement. We called it structural. We called it systemic. In our formal report, in language I chose and stand by as technically defensible even now, we called it an operational posture consistent with an undefended or minimally defended perimeter. Fleet Command accepted the finding. The crossing was authorized. 41 vessels of the line, 9 support craft and 2 command tenders entered the sector designated in the survey records as the outer margin of human space. What followed is in the record. I will not describe it here beyond saying that the fleet's own instruments produced a complete account of what happened to the fleet, and that the opposition column in that account is structurally empty, not redacted, not sealed. Empty, because the fleet's deep scan arrays never resolved a source for what engaged them. The instruments were still functioning when they logged the end. The Compact's review board found no error in our methodology. They were correct. There was no error in our methodology. The instruments measured what they measured. We interpreted the measurements according to every established framework for border threat assessment. We concluded what any team of competent analysts would have concluded from the same data. That is the finding I cannot allow to stand as the final word. Here is what I have understood in 22 years of reviewing the same telemetry, and the same survey records, and the same border history, from a vantage I did not have when I was 37 years old and writing a formal recommendation for Fleet Command. Passive and patient are not the same thing. I know that sounds simple. It is not simple. It took me 9 years to see it and another 13 to be able to write it in a sentence without it feeling like an evasion. The border was quiet for 23 years of survey history, because nothing had crossed it in 23 years that required it to be otherwise. The sector did not move because it had not yet decided to move. The absence of patrol sweeps and active defensive arrays was not evidence of an undefended perimeter. It was evidence of a perimeter that did not need to be actively defended, because the previous several centuries of border history had not produced a crossing that required a response. The instruments measured the current state of a thing that had simply not been given a reason to be different. We gave it a reason. I have spent a long time thinking about the word we used, invitation. We called the stillness an invitation. The phrasing was mine. I wrote it into the summary section of the preliminary assessment, and it was carried unchanged into the final report. An operational posture consistent with an undefended or minimally defended perimeter, constituting, in the assessment of this division, an invitation for transit. I chose that word because the data supported it, and because it was the word Fleet Command needed to hear. I believed it when I wrote it. I do not believe it now. An invitation implies an offered welcome. What we had measured was an absence of objection to our approach, and we had not yet approached. We had not given it a reason to object. What we read as invitation was the face of something that had not yet looked at us, because we had not yet done anything that required it to look. The moment the fleet crossed the outer margin, it looked. I don't know what human space is. I have not known for 22 years, and I no longer expect to. I am a border operations analyst. My discipline is instrument telemetry and threat assessment methodology. I am not qualified to characterize what answered the Kate of our fleet, because the fleet's instruments produced no characterization, and I have no supplementary data. What I know is what the instruments recorded, and what the instruments recorded was this. 41 vessels of the line entered the sector. The fleet's logs show departure, transit, and then 44 hours of engagement data. Weapons discharge from fleet vessels. Hull stress consistent with incoming ordnance, evasive maneuvers, casualty events. The opposition column is empty throughout. At the end of the engagement window, the fleet logs cease. No debris field was recovered. No distress signal was received. No vessel returned to the margin. I know what the instruments measured. I know what the instruments could not measure. They could not measure patience. They could not measure the difference between a thing that is not moving and a thing that is simply not yet moved. They could not measure the 23-year stillness of a border that had not been given cause to become something else, and they could not tell me, from the data alone, whether that stillness was the permanent condition of a space that could not respond, or the current condition of a space that had simply not yet been asked to. We asked. The fleet asked, by crossing the margin, and the answer took 44 hours to complete, and it was thorough. I am writing this ledger because the Coveth Corridor Survey has been running for 8 months, and because I have read the preliminary reports, and because the Coveth team is 7 analysts working from the same methodology this division used 23 years ago, looking at the same border, measuring the same stillness, and preparing the same conclusion. I know this because 2 of them were trained in my division, and I recognize the structure of the phrasing in the section summaries. They are good analysts. They are reading the data correctly. The data is the same data. I am not sending them this ledger. I will not contact the Coveth team or the fleet command that commissioned the survey. I am not their superior. The review is not my review. The conclusion they reach will be their conclusion, reached with correct methodology from correct data, and I have no standing to interrupt it. I am setting down, in a physical ledger, in my own hand, what I understood too late, and what the formal record does not contain. The Institute will file it. In 30 years or 50 or whenever the seal lifts, someone will read it. The border is quiet because it has not yet decided to be otherwise. That is all the instruments can tell you. That is all the instruments could ever tell you. The rest is the question you are asking by crossing the line, and human space has been answering that question, in the same way, for longer than our survey records reach. The stillness was not an invitation. It was the face of something that had finished being patient the moment we arrived. I don't think the Coveth team will request this file. I don't think it would change anything if they did. I have said what I needed to say. I will close the ledger and send it to the Institute tomorrow. The border will be quiet when they cross it. It always is, right up until it isn't.